Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Most Toys, which is episode 22 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a Patreon requested video requested by patron Chase Gullett. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Anyway, Chase, thanks so much for your support. And Chase had requested the third season episode of Star Trek Next Generation, The Most Toys. So The Most Toys is the episode while Data appears to have died while collecting a volatile substance from a trader named Kivas Fajo. However, Kivas Fajo had faked his death in order to capture Data to add to his collection, as Fajo is a collector of rare things. Data continually puts up resistance to Fajo, and eventually the Enterprise learns of this deception, and Data, through some help, is able to corner Fajo with the choice of killing him or allowing Fajo to continue to kill others in Data's name. And so Data discharges a phaser, but is beamed up by the Enterprise and prevented from killing Fajo, where Data claims that the phaser discharge was a malfunction. And so Data returns and Fajo is arrested and his collection confiscated. So, it's funny because when I was looking out doing research for this episode, they said that the title of the episode, The Most Toys, is a play off of a phrase, he who dies with the most toys wins, which I never actually heard that phrase. I heard a different phrase, which I suppose was the counter to that phrase, that he who dies with the most toys still dies, which it makes a hell of a lot more sense to me than the first one, to be honest. I remember seeing that a lot, like on t-shirts and stuff in the 90s, so that's what I always accounted this title of the episode to, is he who dies with the most toys still dies. Like, if you're collecting all this shit or trying to be rich and have all these things and material wealth, it doesn't really do you any good in the end. Anyway, So, I have mixed feelings about this episode. At one point, I consider this episode really great. At another point, I consider this episode very poorly. I think one of the countdowns rewatches I did, I actually rated this episode quite low. Because, here's the thing, like, the deaths fake out storyline of this episode, I really don't like it. It's hard for me to get through these scenes. That's why I don't like rewatching this episode, because it's, for one thing, it's cliche. It's something that Star Trek had done a number of times, and it's not it's not put up very well in this episode, because we, the audience, know that Data's still alive, so that really deflates all these scenes of like Data, of like Geordi and Wesley going through Data's stuff and lamenting on Data's death, and how Council Troy is checking up on Worf and seeing how he's holding up after Data's death, and all this stuff. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, the characters themselves think Data's dead, so the grief that they're feeling is real. But it still feels really undermined by the fact that we, the audience, know that he's alive and well. And we, of course, know that they're going to find this out by the end of the episode. So it does seem to make all this like a pointless exercise, that because it's all going to be undone by the end of the episode. And we know this. This, of course, I mean, they've done this a lot in Trek as well. I suppose most of this stuff came later in the series, although I saw this episode before. I mean, after most of the other episodes, even though it was released before them, like the next phase when Geordi and Ro were dead, or the seventh season episode Gambit, when they thought Picard was dead, and I believe there were a couple episodes of the original series as well when they thought that that Kirk was dead or something. Oh yeah, that Tholian web, they thought Kirk was dead. I don't know, so yeah, there were some examples of this, and there might have been some early examples in TNG I'm just not thinking of, but there definitely were examples of this before this episode came out. And even though I count the episodes that came out after this episode against it, which you might find unfair, but I feel it because this is, as I said, this is the worst example, in my opinion, of that. Like, the next phase actually kind of worked for me. The Gambit thing, not so great, but I think better than this one. I just feel like they dwelled on it too long for the fact that the audience knows for a fact that Data's fine. Also, like, I don't buy that they promoted Worf to ops. Like, why would they do that? He's not a science officer. He's a security officer. So it made total sense for him to take over for Yar because they were in the same field. But why? Ops is like a science-based position. Worf has no business being there. I'm sorry, I love Worf. But this made no sense. I think it was done mainly for plot purposes, so Picard could accidentally call Worf Data, or you know, and then Counselor Troy could talk to Worf about, oh, how's it feel taking over Data's position, when really it should have been a no-name character who took over Data's position. So this it makes no sense for Worf to take over. So that annoys me as well. So everything about this B plot I found really annoying, and then when the Enterprise finally discovered Fajo's deception, like, I didn't find that as like a great aha moment. It was more of, it's about fucking time. God, you guys took a while to figure this out. So, which may be unfair for me for sure, but I really feel I really had no investment in this storyline whatsoever. However, the main storyline with Kivas Fajo holding Data captive, like, I don't know, the concept, this is kind of like a high concept episode, like something you may have seen in like cartoons or other sci-fi shows. Like, every once in a while Star Trek will do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm thinking, for example, the aliens capturing humans to put them in a zoo. That's another high concept episode idea that we've seen throughout, and I'm sure there's others. The body swap, of course, is more common, and there's other sort of sci-fi ideas that you see throughout sci-fi in cartoons and stuff. And so this one is the collector collecting, one of the main characters as a sort of rare item. I think Dexter's Laboratory had an episode about this too. So it's so in and of itself, it's kind of a idea to have. So I'm not that huge on the idea of this story, but the reason why I like this storyline so much, despite that, is because of Saul Rubinek, which I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. The actor who plays Kivas Fajo, who at this point I think I knew him as the guy he played like a reporter in The Unforgiven, which is a great movie. He would later would appear in my favorite episode of The Outer Limits. And I think he's been in a couple other stuff. I've seen him around. He's been around. He had like a cameo in Lost, but whatever. So he's a really good actor. In fact, I think like he hasn't been in enough stuff as according to his abilities, and he does such a good job with Kivas Fajo. He portrays him as such a slime ball. And someone that you get invested in Data's sort of battle of wits with him. You get invested in wanting Data to defeat him, because for most of this episode he's the one holding all the cards. He's the one with all the power, and he knows it. And he's such an egotistical slime ball about it. So you really want to see him defeat it. And Sal Rubinek just does such a great job of portraying that. And so for me, this was definitely the highlight of the episode. Now I think now is probably the time where I can get into the background information or background story of this episode, which a lot of people might be aware of already, but maybe some aren't aware of this. And I wasn't aware of this until like just a few years ago. That originally, Sal Rubernick was not the original actor cast to play Kivas Fajo. Originally, it was an actor, I believe his name was David Rappaport, who was a little person. He appeared in the movie Time Bandits, I believe. And he apparently had attempted suicide during the filming of this episode, so they had to fire him and look for someone else immediately. And a very sad twist in this story is that 2 months later he succeeded in his suicide attempt, which does bring a sort of a dark air over this episode. Now, and I don't like speaking ill of someone who, of course, had committed suicide and suffered a tragedy like that, and obviously was going through a huge depression at the time of filming this episode. But on YouTube, you can see like side-by-side comparisons, because they had filmed a lot of scenes with him as Kivas Fajo, and they're released, so you can go on YouTube and see some scenes with David Rappaport playing Kivas Fajo, and then they have the side-by-side comparison with Sal Rubernick doing the same lines. I'm sorry, like Sal Rubernick is so much better. Like it actually made me appreciate Sal Rubernick even more, because David Rappaport's delivery was so flat, especially compared to Kivas Fajo. I'm thinking particularly the line at the end where Data has the Virulent T disruptor pointed at Kivas Fajo, and and Fajo's like, "Can you really do it? Can you pull the trigger? Can you murder me?" And like the way, I can't reproduce Sal Rubernick's performance because I'm not that great of an actor, but the way he says it, "murder me," it's like, it was so good, it's so sleazy, and the way David Rappaport delivered it, there was like no oomph behind it. It was like really flat. "Oh, murder me?" Like he just said it kind of matter of fact. But Sal Rubernick, and throughout most of his lines, he added this like flair of especially when like Data was trying to like rush at Fajo, and Fajo had this force field that like repelled Data back and hurt him, and the arrogance that Rubernick played of having this power, and like, "Oh, you can try to escape, it might be funny." And also, I love how when he was talking to talking to Data about this, and sort of enjoying this moment so much, and his assistant comes in and says, "Oh, the Andorians want to speak to you about something, the object you're trying to sell." And he's like, "They had 4 days! Why do they have to do it right now?" Like the way he just like explodes with his temper like that, it's such an amazing performance. And I love, so I think this is I gotta be honest, I think this is kind of a dull cliche storyline. As I said, this is something you could see, it's a concept you could see in many other sci-fi and cartoons of the collector collecting someone, but Sal Rubernick's performance transcends that and turns it into something a lot more interesting. And I shouldn't short Brent Spiner either, because his performance is that his reaction playing off of Sal Rubernick is done extremely well and enhances the episode a lot as well. The way Data, you could see him calculating, try to outwit him in his, of course, very matter-of-fact way. And like another like sort of heart-wrenching moment is when, after Data had been refusing to comply with Fajo brings in his assistant and then shows Data like this Virulent T disruptor, which apparently was outlawed by the Federation because it's one of the most vicious, horrible weapons. Like, it kills people in the most vicious, horrible ways. And then Fajo threatens to kill his own assistant, and then Data complies because he wanted Data to sit in a chair, and so Data interrupts him. It's like, Fajo, right before he's gonna like murder his own assistant, and sees that Data's sitting in a chair. So it's a powerful moment because it shows that Data does have a strong moral code, and that he would not be willing to let something horrible happen to, even though Fajo's assistant was one of the people keeping Data captive, he still couldn't condone that kind of or allow that kind of murder to happen. So it really speaks to Data's character, but of course Fajo knows this, and he's using his own moral code against Data. So that was really powerful. And so I want to talk about this ending where, of course, after Fajo threatened to murder her in the most vicious way, her assistant decided to help Data escape. Now, I do like how earlier in the episode Data tried to sort of plant seeds of this end of the system, try to drive a wedge between her and Fajo. And I like how she immediately caught on to what Data was doing and knew that was bullshit. And I thought had he succeeded, it would have been dumb. And there's lesser episodes, Renaissance Man, where they did do stuff like that, which I think was stupid. But it ultimately wasn't Data that convinced her to turn on Fajo. It was Fajo himself, by threatening to murder her in the most vicious way, that convinced her that staying with him was not a good idea. And so she and Data try to escape, but Fajo's men try to stop him. Eventually Fajo himself catches her off guard, and then uses the Varianti disruptor to actually kill her in a very horrible, vicious way. Now, Data was in the shuttle getting it ready to leave, but of course when he hears this happening, he comes out and sees that what he had done. And again, Sal Rubinick's performance in this is just so good. The way he just drops the disruptor, he's obviously a very slimely unscrupulous man who has no moral compunctions about anything, but he still is I wouldn't say human being because he's an alien, but he still has emotions. Like, he still is not like a cold-blooded killer, so he's still very affected by what he just did. And I love that performance where he just drops the disruptor out of shock, out of horror of seeing the horrific way that this person who had served him for 15 years had died, and the shock over having done that. However, he instantly turns into the sort of abuser mentality, the abusive partner, the abusive father. He turns into the abusive sort of mindset mentality, where he immediately tries to avail any responsibility for what he just did, and just turns to Data and is like, "Look what you made me do," which is the classic abuser phrase. Look what you just made me do. And so that interchange between Data and Fajo was so great, because Fajo at this point, he was shattered and broken by what he just did, because he's not a cold-blooded killer. However, he instantly tries to deflect any blame or responsibility for it, and tries to deflect it onto Data. So he tells Data, of course, that if Data refuses to go back to the room and cooperate, that he's going to kill more people. He points to one of his other random guys there and goes, "Oh, him perhaps." And then at this stage, Data's like, I cannot let this continue. And because you're obviously a threat, you're obviously going to harm other people, and I need to put an end to this now. And he picks up the disruptor and points it at Fajo, and Fajo Again, this is another thing that was, again, I already talked about how, David Rappaport's performance in the scene was severely lacking. But anyway, Fajo's response was like, you're not going to do it, because that has been his tactic all along, is to use Data's moral code against him and be like, you can't murder me in cold blood. And with using a weapon, which I'm going to die an absolutely terrible, horrible death. He's like, you're not going to do it. But then Data insists, I can't let this continue, and holds like the disruptor up, and you can see Fajo starting to waver. Like, he visually flinches, because even though he's trying to convince himself, Data's never going to do it, you can tell like he now is completely in doubt and thinks, holy shit, he is going to do it. But then the Enterprise shows up, beams Data aboard, and O'Brien says that he detects a disruptor in the process of discharge, and that he deactivates it. And so Data materializes on the Enterprise, and when we realize where he is, he immediately lowers the weapon, and then Riker brings up the fact that he had discharged the weapon, and Data's response was, it must have been activated by the transporter by accident. It must have just been triggered by accident. I really don't like that line, and I think it kind of ruins the moment. I think because they're trying to leave it ambiguous as to whether or not Data actually did fire the disruptor. However, if you take Data's character into account in the type of person he is, it doesn't actually leave it ambiguous. It actually flat out says that Data did not fire, because we know that Data is incapable of lying. He doesn't hide or try to manipulate Data, that he's very forthcoming. And so if he says, it must have been triggered by the transporter, then we have to take him at his word that he didn't fire it, and that the transporter is the thing that actually activated the disruptor. And it's funny, because the director of this episode and Brent Spiner himself, and in fact, apparently Brent Spiner was extremely adamant that Data did in fact pull the trigger. And the director of the episode also felt that Data pulled the trigger. But I think it was the producers that forced that line in at the end between Riker and Data, because they didn't want, the good guy of Data to appear to have done something like that, so they wanted to leave it ambiguous. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I think that, not completely, but it kind of ruins the episode. It ruins the moment. At least the episode would have been a lot better without it, because I feel like, and I want to contrast with another episode of Star Trek I reviewed a couple months ago, the Voyager episode, Critical Care. In that episode, there's a hospital administrator who has these policies that are basically allowing poor people to die, and he doesn't give a shit about them, and he's going to continue to allow poor people to die when they don't need to. And so the doctor injects him with a virus that will kill him, and the only way the doctor's going to help him is going to cure him, save his life, if he agrees to stop doing what he's doing and stop killing the poor people. And so when the doctor returns to Voyager, he tells Seven to do a diagnostic on him to see if he has malfunctioned, if his moral code has malfunctioned, if there was something wrong with his program. And 709 reports that there's nothing wrong with this program, and that she has to give him a clean bill of health, basically stating that the doctor, there was nothing wrong with his morals, because he was in fact doing the moral thing. He was in fact doing the right thing, even though he was threatening to kill a man and almost killed a man, is because countless other people would have died had he not acted. And I think the same thing applies to Data in this situation. That even though Data was about to kill a man in the most horrific and painful way, that had inaction would have been in greater consequences. Had he not done something to stop Fajo would have continued to kill multiple people in a horrible way, and to hold him captive and continue to act in very unscrupulous ways, which would be harmful to many others, and so that he would need the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That he would need to commit this one, and committing this one horrific act, the consequences would prevent many other horrific acts from happening. So ultimately, there was nothing wrong with Data's moral program. His program, in fact, was operating perfectly fine. And I think that would have been a much, like the way the Voyager did it, that would have been a much more powerful way to end the episode, to be for Data to admit, yes, I was going to kill him in order to save people, and to make it clear that there was nothing wrong with his moral program by doing so, because it was in fact the moral thing to do. But that goes in a gray area which Next Generation was often not willing to go in. Clearly the producers of this episode weren't willing to go there and wanted to make it clear that Data is a good guy. Which I think it was the wrong decision. Absolutely the wrong decision to make. So then I also want to get to this final scene where Fajo's in the brig and he is, being, all upset and taunting Data and saying that everything that he owns, that he'll get again. He'll have Data in his collection again, but Data informs him that that's not going to happen because his whole collection is being confiscated and all the stolen materials being returned to the rightful owners, and he's being stripped of all wealth and power, and he basically has nothing. And Fajo's response is to say, it must give you great pleasure to see me like this. And Data responds, no, it doesn't. I don't feel pleasure. I'm only an android. That is one of the most badass moments. I absolutely love that. Like, in fact, when I did like a top 10 one-liners of Star Trek, and I put that one in as one of my favorite one-liners, because in this case, I do think Data's being a little facetious, because he isn't just an android, and that was the sort of whole discussion, but it's his way of, like, throwing it back in Fajo's face, because the whole time Fajo was treating him just like a piece of equipment, like he's just an android, he can only do so much. And so it's his way of, like, throwing Fajo's words back in his face at that moment. I thought that was just such a badass way to sort of get his revenge on Fajo. Like, it was such a good scene. So my rating for the most toys out of 10. God. It's hard because I'm torn between a 7 and an 8. Alright, I think I'm going to give this the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give the most toys an 8. Extremely good. Although if I did 0.5, it would be 7.5, but I don't do 0.5. Is kind of in between, because I think Saul Rubinek's performance pushes it to an 8, because I love it so much. I love the interactions between him and Brent Spiner's Data. I love that ending scene was so badass, and I love the exploration as Data as a character. But negatives, as I said, that line with Riker where he said, "Oh, it must have gone off by accident." That shouldn't have been there. It kind of ruined the scene, and the whole side plot about Data being dead was not good. And as I said, it makes me not want to watch this episode again. Like, I dread rewatching those scenes because they're just not good. It's just definitely the blemish of the episode. So really, I probably should have given it a 7 at the most for that, just for that. But God, Saul Rubinek does such a good job. This episode, such a good job. So anyway, that is it for my reviews of the most toys. And again, I want to thank Chase Gullett for suggesting this video, and I want to thank, of course, all my Patreon supporters who support me on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. And if you would like to support me on Patreon, there's a link below where you can donate any amount, like just $1 a month, will get you access to Patreon only videos where I post some Star Trek reviews 2 months before anyone else gets it, and like other stuff and whatnot. And of course, if you want to donate $10 a month, then you can request videos like this one, and I shall do them. So anyway, thank you for everyone who watches my channel for checking this out, and if you're finding me for the first time, be sure to subscribe for more Star Trek videos. And of course, I also do videos on other shows like The Expanse, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.